Anyway, here we are. It says here, Elvira Nabulina told that here in Tomsk, as nowhere, you felt the reality of the innovation concept. And then the fact that the 12th Innovative Forum would differ from the 11th one could already been grasped from its emblem. On the preceding emblem, innovative problems seemed to be smeared over individual branches. This was testified by 8 medallions that embodied symbolically branches to which innovative developments should be introduced. All this was drawn against the background of the Russian tricolor surrounding the globe on the equator, of course. The emblem was disputable. The new emblem is laconic, the Russian flag over a part of land, and that is all. No unnecessary details. Now, it's clear to me that this is not written by a native English speaker. It looks to me like an attempt to translate, maybe word for word, from Russian phraseology. And someone who tries to do that, it sounds quite awkward. I can give you an example. For example, this Elvira Nabulina told that here in Tomsk, as nowhere else, as nowhere else, actually, and we say as nowhere, no, as nowhere else, you felt the reality of the innovation concept. The way this would be written by a native would be something like, she said that here in Tomsk, as nowhere else, one feels the reality of the innovation concept. Okay, that would be the way I would phrase it. And then for the paragraph itself, let me see if I can try to rephrase this. That's why translators, when people who are translating documents, what's necessary for the correct translator to do is read an entire paragraph and get an understanding of what the author means to say, is communicating in that paragraph in their native language, and then to rephrase, then to put the same thought, the same idea into the second language without paying attention to the individual words and parts of phrases, but rather to make sure that the entire paragraph conveys the same idea in the second language that was conveyed in the first language. So often, as I say, it's very dangerous to try to translate word for word. I know for a fact that in an earlier life I worked with IBM for quite a few years, and one of the areas of responsibility that I had was in the language area. And IBM was, of course, doing a lot of translation of its documentation into many languages, because its systems were used all over the world. And the way that IBM did the translation, they had some algorithms. In other words, they had a computer that had 2 screens. You had the original text in English of what was going to be translated, and then the machine did a translation, did an automatic translation that the translator could look at, but this automatic machine translation was just a guide, and the translator would really have to start from scratch. There were obviously there were some phrases that the machine produced that would be very helpful to the translator. But the translator was basically asked to reformulate the information into the second language. And by the way, you should always be translating into your native language. In other words, if you're a translator, if you speak, let's say you speak Russian and English, but Russian is your native language, then you're able to translate from English into Russian because you know exactly how the phrase should appear in Russian, in your native language. If you're a native Russian trying to translate into a foreign language, it's very, very difficult and awkward because you're translating out of your native language into a foreign language. So it's really much more relevant and much more pertinent to have a translator if you're talking about the end product being in the English language. Then you really need a native English speaker who might know Russian, but for whom Russian might be a learned language, a second language, so they understand enough Russian to comprehend what's being said in Russian, but they have to repeat the meaning that appears to them in Russian. They have to repeat it in their native language. Yes, thank you, Yuri. In this particular paragraph, innovative problems seem to be smeared over individual branches. Yeah, the word smeared is inappropriate for this context. In other words, displayed is a much more relevant term. If we're talking about, here we're talking about on the preceding emblem, innovative problems seem to be smeared over individual branches. You know,
Russian meaning is spread.
Spread.
Yeah.
I spread. I see.
This is spread.
Spread.
Smear.
So I would say displayed, or okay. I think
the Russian meaning is spread.
Is spread. Okay.
They have the Russian.
Okay. But as I say, the rule of thumb is always, and I know this is the rule of thumb in the translation business. Translation companies always employ people to translate into their native language, out from a language that they have learned. But to translate from your native language into another language is very, very difficult. If you do that, then it's highly recommended that you have a native speaker review that translation and correct any errors that are, that pop up, that are obvious. Actually, a native speaker should edit or rewrite something that has been translated, from Russian. If it's a Russian translating, it's native Russian speaker translating something into the English language, then their translation should be reviewed by a native English speaker and modified so that it flows. Another big error is that kind of tenses. In other words, subjects and verbs and adverbs all need to be in the same tense. And often if you're just translating literally, word for word, you get very confused syntax. So the words might make sense, but the context, when you read the entire sentence, it doesn't hang together.
Can you read and comment this beautiful phrase?
For example,
this is written by the British.
It's what?
By the British guy.
Well, now this is a different problem. But
yeah,
Yuri is explaining. He showed me a sentence. Now, there are, of course, some people who don't make sense in their native language. I mean, it's because you speak the English language, it doesn't mean that everything you write makes sense. For example, this sentence here: early post-war funding of research was justified on the basis of an endless frontier metaphor with an assumption that research results would flow easily to industry in the form of publications. Now, when Yuri asked me to read this earlier, I had to read this several times to even try to understand what it is this person was trying to say. And I still, now reading it again, and then I tried to read the following the sentences that followed this in the rest of the paragraph to see if I could understand from the rest of the paragraph what it is that this person is trying to say. And I'd have to say that I have no idea. But this is not a problem caused by any translation, since this is a person writing in their native language. This is simply a problem of what I would call fuzzy thinking. I mean, it's quite possible that this person doesn't really have a very clear idea in their mind. And if you don't have a clear idea in your mind, then it's really very easy to say something, to express something that's very difficult to understand for a second person to understand. Another option is that this person could have a clear idea, but they're simply not good at expressing this idea in a clear way. That's another possibility. I'd have to read a little bit more of this book, but there are actually there are lots of people who don't have very clear ideas in their minds. So it wouldn't surprise me that that would be the real reason for the difficulty of this sentence and the paragraph.
If you've been to Afghanistan, you